Hello again, everybody. So today, in this video, we'll be discussing Epicurus' views about God and death. So, as you already know, he was an atomist, and he thought we can do more with atomism than just discover the nature of reality. And we can also find out really important things about pleasure, as we saw in the last video, but also God and death, too. So take a minute and think to yourself, if you are an atomist and everything in the universe is made up of atoms, why shouldn't we fear God? So part of what Epicurus was interested in doing is using philosophy to make our lives go better. Right? So many people were afraid of death. Many people were afraid of God. We'll talk about why in a second. But Epicurus thought if we're atomists, then we shouldn't fear God or death anymore. Both of those things no longer worries for us. So if that's true, and he's correct in his reasoning, then philosophy's done us a great service. Right? It's gotten rid of this bad aspect of our life, this fear of God, this fear of death, and has replaced it with either neutrality or something better than that. Right? But at least we've gotten rid of the fear. So why shouldn't we fear God? Well, why might we fear God in the first place? So with our sort of modern day conception of God, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of reason to fear him, right? He's supposed to be perfectly good. He's not vindictive. He's not like open to his whims. He just is this all perfect being. So if that's the type of God that you have, you shouldn't be, I guess, too worried about God. But if we go back to Old Testament God or even previous versions of God, God would punish people, right? God was in control of people's destiny, right? That's the big thing. So whether you're thinking of the ancient Greek gods or something more akin to the Christian God, God's supposed to have this control over your nature, control over your destiny, right? He sets these things in motion or controls them. And so that is reason to fear God, right? What if he is going to interfere with what you'd prefer to do and send you on a different path or send you on a worse path or could be a better path, but just one that you're not that interested in, right? If someone else is in control of your destiny, that's reason to fear them, even if they only do good things with your destiny. Right? It's the fact that you lose this control, and that's something we can fear. But if you're an atomist, all of the gods are just simply made out of atoms like we are. So the atoms actually come and play the role of God in a way, right? So it's often thought that God was the creator of the universe. But if the atomists are right, then the atoms are the things that are eternal and always exist and not God. So it's not that God created the atoms were just always there and always will be there. So if God exists, he's also just a collection of these atoms. The atoms have created him in a way. And if that's the case, well, then God's not the controller of our destiny, right? God is just another being in the universe made up of atoms. Now, he might be a more powerful being than we are, so we might still have some reason to fear this more powerful being. But there's no worry anymore about losing control over our destiny or nature. Right? So if God's just made out of atoms, the atoms created us, there's nothing to interfere with what we want to do with our lives, with what path we're set on, with what our destiny is. We get to be in control of that. No one else interferes in our lives anymore. It's all up to us. Now, you might think it's scary to be in complete control, but at least we eliminate that fear that someone else is sort of puppeteering us, right? So that's the first thing. We shouldn't fear God if we're an atomist, because he didn't create us. He's just another atomic, atomistic being, right? And we get to control our own destinies. God doesn't do that for us anymore. Okay, so that's the first thing. Don't fear God, Epicurus says. Point one for atomism, that's a good thing. Secondly, though, he thinks we also shouldn't fear death. Now, this one might sound a little strange to you. Why might we fear death? Well, so I think it's sort of a common conception that most of us just are scared of death because we're scared of the unknown, whatever your reasoning is, right? You might be scared of um, missing your family, right? Losing out on all these experiences, the end of your existence, right? So if you don't believe in a soul, death could be something that's really scary because it's just the end of your existence. If you do believe in a soul, it could still be scary because you don't know where you're going in the afterlife. There's all of this unknown stuff. Sure, we can think about heaven and hell, but the proof isn't really there, right? So we don't have absolute evidence that that's where we're going or what it's like there, right? We can think about what heaven's like, but what if it's very different from what we reason about? So there's an issue there, either way, whether you believe in a soul or not, that you still could fear death. And I mean, it's pretty common, right? So if you ask people, are you afraid of dying? Yeah, I'm afraid of dying. And Epicurus thinks that's just not rational. So if you're an atomist, there's absolutely no reason to fear death. And this is partly because of his atomism, partly because of what he believes about morality and pleasure. Right? So if you think the standard of goodness is just pleasure, well, then there's no reason to fear death at all, right? Because in death, you're not going to have any experience either way, right? So when you die, you'll no longer have pleasure and you'll no longer have pain. The only bad thing in the world, according to Epicurus, is feeling pain. When we obtain pain, we experience whatever we're going to consider here is evil. But if we have that, if we don't have that in death, there's a complete absence of all pain. So there's an absence of all things evil, right? So there's no reason to fear this because nothing bad can possibly happen to you once you're dead, right? That's what Epicurus is thinking here. So when you die, your atoms just disperse, right? And they form some other object or float around in the void, and you're just gone. And there's no experience either way. Now you might be worried, okay, sure, I won't feel pain anymore, but I also won't feel pleasure, and isn't that something that's bad? And so if we're supposed to be worried about obtaining pleasure, and now we have the absence of pleasure for the rest of eternity, seems like something bad occurred. But this also doesn't work if you're Epicurus and an atomist, right? Because it's not just that you won't feel pleasure anymore either. It's that it's the complete absence of all of these experiences, right? So we don't have to worry about feeling pleasure or pain. There's just nothing to describe here. You've died, your atoms separated, and now there's nothing to fear. Because nothing bad can possibly happen to you. So we shouldn't fear God. He can't control our nature or our destiny. We shouldn't fear death because that's just the complete absence of pain. So nothing evil can happen to us there. And so if Epicurus is right, then he's solved two major problems for us, right? So as long as we think he's right about the pleasure principle, he's just shown us that we can still have these pleasurable things in life and we won't get the pain of fear from either God or death. Now, obviously, this all depends on the atomist picture, right? So if you think there's a soul, right, this immaterial soul that exists in addition to the atoms, then this doesn't work anymore because once you die and your atoms disorganize themselves, you're now somehow a soul, right? And this soul can still have experiences of pleasure or pain, and so you might still feel bad things in the future if you believe in the soul. But for Epicurus, it doesn't even get that far. It stops at the atoms. There's nothing else but atoms, right? It's just atoms and void. So we don't have this discussion about the soul and what it can feel afterward. Death is just the end of experience completely. Now, that's all we need to say about Epicurus. He thinks he's eliminated fear in two important aspects of our life. But remember, this all depends on believing in the atomist picture, believing in this purely physical picture of the world. There's no immaterial God or soul or angels or anything like that. Right? There's just atoms and void, and that's it. So you might wonder, why should you believe the atomist picture? So physics has done a pretty good job. I mean, the atomists, remember, were an influence on Newton's work, Isaac Newton's work, and our atomic theory that we've developed later on. But here's an issue for purely physical descriptions of the world. Right? So if you're an atomist and all you think that exists are atoms and void, how do you explain something like consciousness? Right? So we have these conscious experiences. Right now, I'm seeing myself on the screen here, and I'm seeing all sorts of colors. I'm having, let me see if I can get this here, a black, and then red, and then sort of a beige. And I'm having all of these conscious experiences of colors. I'm having a conscious experience right now of being slightly warm, right, slightly tired, so on and so forth. I'm having all of these full conscious experiences. And if you think that the world is purely physical, or all that exists are atoms, well, how does this consciousness suddenly pop up out of the atoms that exist? Right? So how is it that when my atoms all came together and arranged themselves in a James-like fashion, that this secondary thing that seems to be purely mental, right? It seems that it's not physical, popped up and is now in existence. That doesn't seem to make sense. It doesn't seem like the atomists can explain that. Even if they think that once atoms come together and make something of a certain complexity, maybe I'm so complex, or we're all so complex, not just me, that consciousness arises out of that. But then why not think that all of these other objects are conscious too, right? So take a tree, for example. So all of the atoms of the tree come together. Why doesn't consciousness arise there? Right? So how are they going to explain the difference? So just to make the problem clear, first, it doesn't seem like an atomist can explain our conscious experience in general. They might just be lost there with no way to explain it. Now, there are some solutions, but we'll talk about those in the future. Second, even if they can somehow explain our conscious experience, why is it that only certain conglomerations of atoms get consciousness and others don't? So yeah, that's just food for thought. Think about the atomic structure. That's also a problem for some purely physical pictures of the world coming from science today. So yeah, hope you have fun thinking about that. Hope you no longer fear God or death and your life's going to go better. And next we'll talk about the idea of God. Thank you.